going over today?
We are going to go over the ones that have to do with the motor movements, the one that spoke about, what else? The parts of the brain that develop critical versus sensitive periods. That's what we'll talk about today.
With the first writing, I think.
Ismael?
Not yet. It's not posted yet.
Michael? Natalie Garcia? Shanice? Ivo? This is the one right here. Xiao Chen? Geraldine? Evelyn Diaz? Michael Ackerman? All right. I think that's okay. And that's all I have right now. If I didn't give you back, is the first motor skills, right? That's the question on this. Ismael, and Aida.
Oh, yeah.
Alright, so let me take attendance.
Which one was that?
This was the one that we actually did, you guys did in the computer lab, so it was this one. So probably if I left it in my office, I got probably stuff with other papers, so don't worry about it. Okay, Michael Ackerman, Ferda, Andrea, Xiao Chen, Shanice, Evelyn, Ivo, Natalie Garcia, Ariana, Layla, David, Jeanette, Geraldine, Michael Messina, Desiree Morales, Crystal, Ernesto, Ismael, Cassandra, Yesenia, Janitza, Aimide, Monica, sorry, Cheryl.
Right here.
Okay. Okay, so just to go over really quickly, because I wrote some comments. If you got your papers back, I just wrote some comments. For those of you who don't have, I didn't give you back the papers. For the first one, the first set of motor skills to develop, this is a tricky one because you assume if you hear motor skills, you'll think, okay, start walking, moving around, doing cartwheels. The first motor skills are actually reflexes. And so when you're studying, think of not just, don't think of just, the Babinski reflex, for example, the Moreau reflex, which is part of it, but also the more, the other types of reflexes that we're born with that stay with us. So, for example, blinking, the blinking reflex. The next one, the answer was artificial insemination. And this one, the key to why it's artificial insemination is because the question, if I remember correctly, asked that she wanted to use the method that was the least invasive, or that was the least technologically invasive. Remember with artificial insemination, basically they'll place the sperm at the very point of the cervix, and from there the sperm will travel up by itself through the uterus. If we start with gamete intrafallopian transfer, then basically you're inserting all the way, you're going through the reproductive system and you're inserting the sperm in the area of the fallopian tube. So that one you had to be careful about. The idea was the least invasive technology, method of technology, reproductive technology. The next one for C, the APGAR score was 1, and it had to do, for example, with the fact that, the heart rate was around 93, and there was weak muscle tone, but also the extremities had a bluish tinge to it, okay, and that's what made it APGAR score 3. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to talk about it, but, that's important for you to keep in mind, because once the baby is born, there's certain tests that are given to make sure that the baby is okay. So one of the things they do is to test some of these reflexes. The Babinski reflex, for example, should be present. The Moreau reflex should be present. So if it's not, this is letting them know something must have gone wrong with development. If the areas of the brain, like the brainstem, the midbrain, were fully developed the way that it should have been at birth, then these reflexes should be present. Okay? As the infant grows older, within the first 6 months, these reflexes, the Moreau, the Babinski, and some of the other ones, they start to disappear. But at birth, they should be present. The next one, the reason why it makes sense that the prefrontal, frontal lobe, frontal cortex area is not fully developed, those areas are responsible for higher order cognitive processing. Things like thinking, planning, impulse control. When a baby's just born, they don't need to do these things. And so it makes sense that the areas that are responsible for vital functions, like breathing, like controlling your heart rate, those areas should be more fully developed. But babies don't need to know how to think. Their memories don't need to be perfect from the moment that they're born, so it makes sense. Okay? Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay. All right, next. The reason, okay, so 2 babies were born. One seems to be showing symptoms, I guess, of fetal alcohol syndrome, and maybe the other one is not. With this was just to for you guys to keep in mind that there's a number of things to consider when we're talking about the influence of teratogens. A lot of you gave me a few of them, but think about everything from the amount of the teratogen that's consumed, the timing in which it was consumed. So if it was consumed during the germinal period, we could be talking about a miscarriage. If we're talking about during the point of the embryonic stage, where the face is being formed, suddenly you're seeing the influence of the alcohol on the structure of the face. And of course, throughout development, the brain is continuing to be developed. So you're going to see influences on intellectual development. The other thing is that consider the genetic code. Just in the same way, some people catch colds very easily. I'm one of those. If you look at me, I catch a cold. And other people, they can run around naked in 33-degree weather, and they're just like, oh, it's a bit chilly. That's the same way with our susceptibility to teratogens, okay, for babies. But there's a number of things. Age, state of the mother, all of these things play a role. Next, should the mother be concerned? What do you guys think?
Yes.
Absolutely. So one of the first things you should have thought about were the reflexes we spoke about. But the other thing, which I didn't see too many people put down, what about hearing? While vision actually continues to develop, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, while vision continues to develop within the first month or so, first couple of months or so of birth, hearing should be established by the time that infant is born. And so if this, baby brother, big brother, is yelling boo, and that infant is not responding at all, maybe something is wrong with the development of the auditory system, which is highly likely. Remember, there are some teratogens that would affect the auditory system, specifically drugs like cocaine or heroin. It will affect the auditory system. Does anybody have any questions about that? Are we okay? The last one, the answer was cell differentiation. We're going to talk about that today. It was in one of the slides. Cell differentiation has to do with the idea that cells become more specialized for a particular function. So again, for the last answer, I think that was G. What is one of the mechanisms that will continue to develop through the first couple of years? It's cell differentiation. So for example, as you expose children to stimuli, as you work with them, as they hear language, there are cells that are becoming more specific, more specialized for specific skills within the first couple of years of life, specifically within the first 2 years of life, okay? And that was the answer. These I didn't grade, but I want you guys to actually use this as part of your study notes. I think it helps you to kind of think about, you know, to remind you what are some of the things you need to go over. Use it as a study guide, and that was pretty much it. The other paper that you gave me with the Hugel and Weasel, I'm using that as attendance. And as we go through the slides, we'll talk about a lot of the answers we spoke about. And your grades for assignment number 1 is up. Okay, so just check. It's on Blackboard. Okay.
Now you made us want to leave the classroom to check it.
Well, hopefully that means you guys are just paying so much attention that then you end up running to go see your grades. Right? All right, so when we start the next chapter, okay, we're talking about the development, more so physical, we're more so focusing on physical development here. We're going to talk a little bit about the development of the brain as well as physical development. What you're looking at, and it's amazing if you think about it, within 9 months, I mean, basically you have an organism, the establishment of an organism that's no bigger than basically the dot that you make with the end of your pencil to this baby that ends up being 6-7 pounds. And if you look at the development of the brain, it's happening so quickly. It's absolutely amazing. But the growth doesn't actually end once the baby is born. Development actually continues, especially with the brain. Within the first 2 years of life, connections are being made with different neurons in the brain. Neurons are becoming specialized in order to process different things, to do certain skills. What you see is that there is a difference in terms of when different parts of the brain actually develop and how fast they actually do develop. So for example, the first areas of the brain that will be developed upon birth include the brainstem and the midbrain. And we just went over that. It makes perfect sense. These are the areas that are more vital for life. We're talking about breathing. We're talking about controlling the heart rate. We're talking about consciousness, being able to go from the sleep to the wake cycle. All of that should be established at birth. But when we talk about the cortex, the cerebral cortex, the higher level, the highermost layer of the brain, that's higher order cognitive functions. Those don't need to be as developed at birth, and as you go on in terms of development, they will be. Okay. So basically, this just says what I just said. Certain areas will be established first. So you have the brainstem and the midbrain. By the time this child is within the first month of life, these areas, they're just fine. Then you have the limbic system. Limbic system is responsible for things like memory, emotion, and other motivational processes. And this might sound familiar for some of you from general psych.
Hearing, you said?
Say it again?
Hearing?
No, not hearing. So
Memory.
Right, memory. Hearing would be involved in the midbrain, okay? But when we talk about limbic, this is memory, emotion, and other motivational processes. Okay, so for example, controlling the internal state of the body, the temperature, for example, of the body, that's also involved. Then you have cortical areas and the frontal cortex, which are higher order cognitive functions. Let me know if I'm going too fast. I'm on a high. I've had so much coffee today, it's hard to believe it. Let me know if you want me to repeat anything.
Do those rectangles at the bottom, do they necessarily go all the way up in that order?
What do you mean? So
If you take those lines, yeah, you go draw them up with that section of what's happening.
There's like limbic match 1 year, and there's cortical match 3 years.
yes, so what it's showing you is the amount of development that's occurring as you go across. You increase in time, so it matches up exactly. Okay.
What about the baby reflexes? Is that happens
That
also
should
in the
be
midbrain
established
also?
with the development of the brainstem and the midbrain, that should be established.
Is that in the book?
I don't know if the book goes into detail about that, but because I presented it, you already know. Now, the other thing is that you guys are already aware of this, okay? There are basically critical periods and sensitive periods in development. When we talk about critical periods, it's basically a time at which development must occur. So when we talk about critical period, it's a time at which development must occur. And there's critical periods for many different things. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. It's a time at which development must occur. A time at which development must occur.